right, good evening. Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of December 2nd, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciac, could you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters. Ms. Cleland-McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to excuse Mr. Walters from tonight's council meeting. Second.
A motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Ms. Hubick to excuse Mr. Walters. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, three is announcements and committee reports. A couple announcements from me. So starting today, although I didn't see them out there, but Cascade Natural Gas along with Evergreen Pipeline Inc. will be working to install a new regulator station over by the 22nd and Q Avenue. That'll go all the way to the Tommy Thompson Trail on R, so there'll be tunneling. But the important part of that construction, so it will be on the east side of the roundabout at 22nd Street, will likely be closed for 1 or 2 days, so just be aware that there will be potential for street closures there. Again, east side of the 22nd Street roundabout, starting to look for that tomorrow. And again, the most current information is always available on our website. Next announcement, there'll be a Tommy Thompson Trail meeting on December 4th at 12:30 at the library. The city will be hosting a Tommy Thompson Trestle update, and that meeting again on the 4th at 12:30 at the Anacortes Public Library Community Meeting Room. So Samish will be represented, Skagit Marine Resources Committee and City of Anacortes will be joined by project consultants to discuss the latest environmental findings and conceptual designs for the trestle replacement study. Climate element, also known as the climate team information, will be there'll be a marine waterfront focus panel Wednesday, December 4th at 6 p.m. and it's a Zoom meeting. So planacortes.org or .gov is always the place you can go to get the link to that meeting. This meeting will focus on content related to marine shorelines, waterfronts, and related issues. We'll be sharing findings with the city's recent greenhouse gas inventory, as well as information on future coastal vulnerabilities. The meeting is an opportunity for attendees to learn more about the climate element, ask questions, and share feedback. Chamber of Commerce Coastal Christmas tree lighting is this Friday, December 6th, and 6 p.m. for the tree ceremony. Photos with Santa at 7 p.m. And then there's apparently a free screening of Elf at the Anacortes Cinema later. And finally, two more. An annual holiday parade is this Saturday at December 7th at 11 a.m. And finally, congrats to Anacortes High School football. The Seahawks once again will be traveling to Husky Stadium for the state championship game, and this Saturday, 7th of December at 3 p.m. So go Hawks. All right, first committee report, Public Works Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee met at 5 p.m. today, Public Works staff and Councilmember Young and myself. And it was a shorter meeting than usual. We talked a little bit about the capital facilities plan, specifically South Commercial from 14th to 34th, and we were talking about the financing for that project because there's $18 million for it and EAT for about 3 years coming up, and that's attributed to grants. So we talked about kind of tightening things up because we found that some of the items in our CFP, not just in Public Works, but in other places, we don't have really solid funding mechanisms identified for those. So that's something that some of us for sure would like to kind of tidy up and snug up going forward. So we'll be talking about that at the Finance Committee and of course at full council as well, because we don't want our CFP to be as aspirational as it is. We want it to be more realistic. So we'll be working on that as a group. We talked also about the Traffic Safety Committee a little bit and what's happening there and some recurring themes, and staff is discussing those themes and how to address them. For instance, things like signs, things like where crosswalks go, but things that have recurred with constituents writing in or calling in, and staff would like to discuss these things with council to make sure that we are all in agreement and going in the right direction on certain topics, that we're all pulling the same way. So that'll be really good too. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Mr. Young?
Mr. Young?
Ms. Moulton, you always do a fabulous job. There wasn't anything urgent. You checked off all of the litany of things that I would have mentioned myself. So, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, other committee reports that I may have missed or other announcements? Okay, we'll move on to item 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public wishing to address the council on anything not on our agenda tonight. I didn't have anybody signed up, but I'll give you another chance for anybody here in the audience. Okay, move on to our consent agenda, items 5A and B. Council.
Miller,
Mr. Young.
I move we approve the consent agenda, items 5A and B.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Young and second by Mr. McDougall to approve consent agenda items A and B. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. All right, we are on to other business, items 6 and 6A and B kind of go together. And first is ordinance 4090, the 2025 operating budget. This is a discussion item with possible action. And then item B is ordinance 4088, 2024 to 2029 capital facilities plan amendment. This is a discussion item with possible action. And I think I gave Mr. Hoagland time to get his presentation set up. So, Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. We are continuing our discussion on the CFP and budget from last week. So we had a few items to follow up. So a little bit of information we'd like to share with council. So this is what few of the items that we heard that council wanted additional information on. So more information on our FTE and headcount plans, more information on sales tax, REIT, and ER&R. So I'll go through a few of those items now. So this is what we looked at. To begin with, the column on the left is the original budget at $114 million, and you can see the major items that we've made edits to in the budget, moving from left to right: the outfall, creosote pilings, breakwater, pavement management, and downtown streetscape. So at this point, the requested draft operating budget is at $124.3 million. The majority of that increase from the original $114 million is from the outfall, moving additional budget into 2025 for the outfall. The top right corner of this slide is kind of a summary of the years that we're talking about in both the operating budget and the CFP. This is, you can maybe look at this at your leisure. We can go through it if you like, but this is just details that flow into those edits that we were talking about. And then on the left side, you can see the different years are highlighted, so easy to identify which year we're talking about for each edit. So talking about FTEs, our position budget, we talked about this at the department head meeting a week or two ago, and what we're talking about is kind of a hiring freeze, for lack of a better term. We don't have really a policy-driven hiring freeze in place right now, but we are scrutinizing each position that does come open. Council is aware that the finances have slowed down a little bit at the city. Sales tax has slowed down, and we have other limitations in our tax revenue streams. So specifically, tax-funded positions such as, parks, finance some of those types of positions. The utilities are a little bit easier to, when we have positions, those are a little bit easier to fund because they have revenue streams based on the utility that are driven by the budget that was put in place the prior year. But some of the things that I would like to see in place before we get back to kind of that normal level of hiring and filling each budgeted position, council's aware that we have a significant amount of FEMA replacement monies that have been budgeted and approved for us to receive, but we have not received those yet. So specifically the ladder truck and Station 3, those two items alone represent over pushing $4 million just between those two items, as well as additional patrol cars. So getting those FEMA dollars into the city coffers would go a long way towards relieving some of the cash flow pressures that we have been experiencing. And then also just seeing the economic indicators in improving what we're seeing right now in sales taxes. And I have another, we'll talk about sales tax in more detail in a little bit, but sales tax has been tailing off, and that's one of our primary tax revenue streams, the one we rely on the most for increasing revenues. Property tax is limited to 1% increase per year. Utility tax has traditionally been flat for the last several years, so sales tax is where we make up some of that shortfall. So, and also kind of a solidified plan in place for additional hospitality opportunities. We've been talking about an event center, talking about trying to get the BC Ferry back in place, or maybe there's something else out there that would provide, those additional hospitality revenues to come into the city. And the large MJB project that we have down on the waterfront, in addition to a large one-time influx of retail sales tax from the construction, what they're proposing down there would provide some level of ongoing revenues as well. So once we see these kind of levers, start to fall into place, it'd give us much more comfort level in going back to that regular FTE plan that we have in place and filling some of those positions. Sales tax. So this is a little bit of historical sales tax information. The years 2016 through 2023 are actual revenues. And then 2024 is year to date. So I think, if I understand what council was after, we put a sales tax budget into place at the beginning of the year, or when the budget draft is first put into place, and then we monitor that throughout the year. So I wanted to provide an update of what we have in place for budget, what we've seen so far, and then how that projects through the end of the year. So this 2024 year-to-date column at $5.2 million, this includes January through November sales tax receipts. So we have 1 month of revenues left to collect on our sales tax. Based on historical norms, we have collected 92% of our sales tax through November. So if we take that 5.2, divide it by 92%, we come up with a 5.7 projected receipts for 2024. And that's against a 2024 budget of $5.4 million. So when we put the budget together initially, we projected to be, I believe we projected to be down 10% compared to the prior year. At this point, we are about 4.5% compared to the prior year. So we're down, instead of being down 10%, we're down 4.5%, and that translates to about $260,000 additional dollars in sales tax revenue if December comes in as projected. So the 2025 budget at $5.55 million, this was based on flat sales tax projections, flat compared to 2024, and that was based on, I believe it was August receipts. So what we had collected through August, we did that same projection through the end of the year and came up with $5.5 million and used that as our 2025 projection. So that's where that number comes from, and that's how that stacks up against the existing 2024 budget and then the updated 2024 projection. Okay. This is looking at our, I guess I'm going through that a bit quickly. Any questions, I'd be happy to. Okay. So this is looking at our road fund resources. There was a question last week about the resources that go into our roads, and we have two road funds. We have a road maintenance fund, which is the fund that we do our overlay program out of. That's fund number 104. We also have a road construction fund. It's also called the Arterial Street Construction Fund. That's Fund 105, and that's the fund that we do our road construction projects out of. So this top left box up here, looking at Resolution 1895, this was the original Transportation Benefit District resolution that put the original pavement project or pavement program into place, and then Resolution 2018 updated that to 1.8 million, and that was based on the TBD sales tax getting approved by the voters. So this is the resources that were used at that time to come up with the $1.8 million per year. Looking at these three columns, 23, 24, 25, the majority of this information is looking at the revenues. So fund balance is one of our revenue sources. If we have cash reserves that we can apply towards the program, that's what fund balance is. Property tax, you can see in 23 was 650,000, 900,000 in 24, and in 2025 we have zero budgeted in property tax for Fund 104. So going down through the program there, the TBD tax, Transportation Benefit District, projecting 1.3 million, solid waste utility tax, 500,000. And then a couple other smaller revenue streams, pearled sulfur. Multimodal is a shared revenue from the state, and MVFT, that's motor vehicle fuel tax, that's a portion of tax that's charged on gas that comes back from the state, and projecting 311,000 for 2025. So I wanted to point out in this year's budget, 2024, the motor vehicle fuel tax is budgeted at 20,000. It appears that the multimodal shared revenue was inadvertently used in the MVET section of the budget. That should be closer to 300,000, not 20,000. That was a budgeting error when finance put the budget together. But for 2025, you can see we're budgeting 2.36 million in revenues, and that works out to allow about 700,000 left in the 104 budget for overlays. The rest of that money that would typically go into Fund 104 for overlays is being put into 105 to fund the overlay portion, effectively the overlay portion of the South Commercial Project. So I know I covered a lot there. Feel free to jump in with questions. I'll jump over to Fund 105 in the meantime. So looking at the same three-year breakdown over the last couple of budget periods, 140,000 was budgeted in 2024 in Fund 105, and then you can see every year the majority of the budget for arterial street construction is grants and impact, or REIT and impact fees. So these transfers those are transfers into the road fund from other sources, those sources being real estate excise tax and impact fees. So for 2024, the current year, we had initially 6.3 budgeted in grants, 693,000 in REIT and impact fees, and the road projects budget was 6.8 million. And year to date, you can see we've spent about 4.3 million. Looking forward to 2025, majority of the revenues is in grants at 8.3 million, and then the transfers in at 2.5, and we're putting everything into that Commercial Avenue project next year at 10.7 million. So the REIT that we would traditionally put into the road overlays in Fund 104 over here, you can see there's nothing budgeted in 2025. we're putting all of that into the road fund.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. So the road actuals of almost 1.9 in 2023 and then 4.3 million in 2024 makes sense. On the other side, in Fund 104, the actual overlay 2023, roughly 2.2 million and then 1.8 million this year.
Yeah, that 1.8 is year to date. I
Year-to-date,
think there's
okay.
a few outstanding invoices
Right, so
still.
we're basically hitting the 1.8 target or even like last year shot over it, but that's okay because TBD is coming in higher than the sales tax. What the total expenditures, the bottom row, what are those numbers? Because they don't seem to, is it cumulative of previous?
Yeah, no, so that would be for the year. So in 2023, we spent 2.1 on overlays. Of that 4,034,000, 2.1 of that was on overlays, and the rest of it is for the other stuff they do in road maintenance, the crack sealing,
Got it,
you know,
okay.
those types of
Other
acti-
104
Yes.
fund stuff that isn't overlays? Okay.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and the same applies to the total expenditures on the right-hand side then? That's, the road projects are like close to 1.9 million, but there's an additional like 400,000 last year in other 105.
Yep,
expenditures.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's right. And Fund 105 is the fund that we do the sidewalk work out of as well. So we generally budget around 400,000 for sidewalk construction and ramp cutouts, ADA cutouts. So that's in Fund 105 as well. So so the majority of that 1.8, you know, plus the sidewalk work, I suspect represents the, you know, over 90% of that 2.3.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
So I wanted to talk about real estate excise tax. I'm sorry, if council's ready to move on, and we can spend as much time as you like, but
Yeah, Mr. Hoagland, he only has a couple more slides, so we can, obviously, council wants to go back to review any of these.
so this chart, this spreadsheet shows the resources for our CFP amendment for 2025. So this is just looking at 2025. You can see where we have fund balance identified, taxes, so the 1.2 million in transportation, that would be the TBD money. But the REIT, I think, is what council wanted a little more detail on. So in this chart, you can see in general government, we have 90,000 budgeted in REIT. Parks has 240,000. Public Works Ops, 565, and Public Works Transportation, 2.5 million. And then this section of the spreadsheet on the bottom, I just have an arrow pointed to that total REIT of 3.4 million, just so you can see how those tie together. So the 240,000 in parks is made up of these projects right here, the depot, parks infrastructure, pickle courts, et cetera. The transportation REIT projects are listed out here, the largest of which 1.5 for Commercial Avenue or 1.9 for Commercial Avenue, and then Public Works Ops. And the 90,000 in general government, that's for the museum workshop, and that's the majority of that project being paid for with museum restricted funds and donations, and then the 90,000 in REIT. Okay. So another question that council had was what was driving the ER&R budget? Apologies. Catch up to my own notes. But council had a question about what was driving the ER&R budget. Was it inflation, or was it vehicles, number of vehicles increasing? And that's what we're trying to illustrate here, that it's actually both. So if you look at 2019, the line part of the chart shows the number of vehicles that were purchased that year. The light blue is the cost of those vehicles, and then the dark blue is the replacement portion of those vehicle costs. The left-hand side here, a couple of things that are bulleted out. The average of 4.7% annual inflator. So looking back, that's the average of what we are increasing the replacement charges year to year is 4.7%. So if you have, like a lot of our vehicles, like pickup trucks, if a vehicle has a 10-year life, over that 10 years, we would have a 47% inflator over the original purchase price. In 2023, you can see the big jump in 2023 of vehicles that were purchased. We had, in the police, we had 4 vehicle replacements and a generator. The street department, we had a paver, a maintainer, and an excavator. And then in the fire department, we had a admin vehicle, a brush truck, UTV, and 2 motorcycles that were all used, developed to be used for forest land fire response. I believe was my last slide, so happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, council, over to you all.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Hoagland. I'm wondering if you could go back to one of your earliest slides. It's the table of things that have been changed in the CFP. That one. Thanks. I just want to have. Maybe if you'd like to give us a little bit of an overview as we're all kind of looking. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, going from left to right, the different columns are the department, the year, the spend area. So effectively what portion of the budget that we're talking about, or what segment of the budget we're talking about. What that budget amount was when we were talking last week, the adjustment amount, and then what we're talking about this week on 12/2. So. The first 3 lines are professional services. This was all, these first 2 items in the planning department. There was a discussion about moving some dollars from economic development strategic plan, and then down to the $84,500, the allocation for a community action office, and then professional services on the 3rd line down, related to the Downtown Alliance. This first red cell in 2024, the color coding represents the different years. But last week we were talking about in 2024, the outfall project had 16 million. That's been adjusted now to 11 million. And then in 2025, we adjusted that project up to 9.5 million.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton. Yep.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Hoagland. So I was confused, I think, by the column headings, because it says November 25th amount, adjusted amount, and then December 2nd amount. So I was reading where your cursor is as being 0, but what we're really looking at is that middle column. The adjusted amount is the amount we're looking at right now. That's the change. And so that 12.2 amount is more the difference of the 2. Is that right?
Yes, you're exactly
Okay.
right.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks. Now I can follow.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
The creosote piling removal, 120,000 moved out of that in the 2024 budget, and then that same line item in 2025 moved to from 250 to 515,000. The breakwater, we bumped out the majority of that project, left 40,000 in it in the current year, or for 2025. 2026, we adjusted that same breakwater project to 320,000. The City Hall seagull mitigation at 30,000. We did identify that a falconer would be considered as one of the alternatives. And then the 700,000 for pavement management, we did have that in the operating budget, but it wasn't reflected in the CFP. 2024, the 5.5 million for Commercial Avenue was moved out. 2026 and 2028, the 900,000 streetscapes were edited, and 2025, we put 80,000 in for streetscapes.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Unless there are more questions on this particular slide, I wanted you to elaborate just a little bit about how did you come up with, the 4.7% to show that the change in pricing, and just explain how that came about and what was the genesis.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the finance department, one of our senior accountants works closely with the fleet supervisor or the operations manager now. So that was, that's something that was worked into. It's always been part of the replacement charges calculation, but that has changed over time. So it's almost like a negotiation when we're putting that budget together from year to year. The shop and the accountant work together to, try to establish a reasonable inflation rate.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thanks. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the breakwater and the creosote pilings. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that, because I think one of the questions was, well, I think we've seen that it's going to cost more than we think, but we're not sure about the estimate, and there still might be some questions about the ownership and who's responsible. So I'm wondering if, I'm still trying to figure this out, how we're addressing that. So I'm still kind of looking at this, because this is part of what we're being asked to approve tonight, right? So I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Coleman wants to jump in on this one, or again, we believe the estimate is good for the creosote pile removal, but Mr. Coleman, help bail me out here.
All right, thank you. So at the last council meeting, we discussed taking money out of the breakwater project and putting it into the pile removal and replacement. And so that's why you see 40,000 left for the breakwater. That would be more like planning and permitting in 2025 in anticipation of work in 2026, hopefully. And then based on the figures that the mayor had talked to Culbertson about, and others, and the confirming that with what the creosote piling per pile and permitting, that's where this adjusted figure comes up to, and it's significantly higher than what we had put in the first go around.
Thank you, that's helpful. And also, now that I see that 2026 is the year where that breakwater money is going. So this would be, because it's still sort of in flux a little bit, I mean, this is essentially a placeholder.
Yeah, I mean, you can get to the hard question of how we're going to pay for it, and we always identify revenue sources. And right now, Mr. Hoagland, you've identified what for that?
So at this point, fund balance is what we have identified for that project.
It wasn't a trick question, but like always, we always try to get grants. And back to the ownership issue, there's going to be some discussion about, who has the responsibility for which portions, and we're still trying to work some of that out.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
Just in regards to that project, I know that the marinas down there, there's also some businesses that are located down there that are protected by that breakwater. And so it was my understanding that we're kind of gathering all the leases that we have, and then we're going to have a conversation about who has responsibility according to our current leases. But is there an opportunity, as we're talking about funding, as those leases expire, I guess we're going to find out when they expire, can they be amended, can they be changed? You had mentioned possibly assigning a little bit of responsibility for funding here and there to this project, so
Mr. Coleman,
is
you
that
want to
kind of what I'm hearing?
try to answer some of those lease questions? Because I'll mess it up.
Most of the leases are still good for several years, some of the bigger ones. And some of the smaller ones that would not, they're for lesser amounts of dollar amounts right now. There's some, I think we need to talk about redoing those leases, but considering the scale of those, it's not gonna cover the whole project.
Okay, and then just one other question. I feel if you've had conversations with, did you say Culbertsons? Right, who I think was the ones who did all the other breakwater for them last year, because they didn't know?
So Culbertson gave us the estimate for the creosote pile removals, just to be clear.
Got it, because I know that there was some work done, that we're the last piece, or this is the last piece that needs to be completed down there. The other breakwaters have all been done. So have we checked with the people that have done those around their cost estimates, or?
Yeah, however, since we're not talking about the breakwater repair this year, those numbers are gonna change based on inflation. But yes, I do know how much it cost per piling to repair the breakwater, based on the Fidalgo Marina Owners Association. They just completed their work earlier this year or late last year. So those figures are pretty recent, but we know that costs are increasing.
And last question, and this is more of a process question about the budget approval process and the CFP in general. So I'm sure most of you probably already know this, but anything that we do tonight, like if we vote to approve it or whatever, if there is something that comes up that's significantly different or we learn of something, we can go back and do an amendment, right?
100%, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll see Mr. Hoagland in a couple of weeks for end of year budget amendment.
Yep.
And I think quarterly is typically, we don't always get it perfect.
But yeah, that's the intent. We tried to do a quarterly budget amendment along with a quarterly update. So kind of a couple weeks from now is kind of what I'm thinking. Be back
Mayor
to
Miller.
do that.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Thank you. Just to finish up the discussion about our DNR lease and the two projects, I feel fairly comfortable with the adjustments that have been made from last week to this week, but I do want to stress the importance of us, when staff is able to get the information, at least round one of the information, we really need a memo that is provided to us before our meeting, and then have a real discussion about the DNR lease that we hold and the expectations and responsibilities associated with that, and then also the leases that we hold for our tenants, essentially. And I mean, some of these are extremely low dollar amounts that they're paying for access for this service. Now, that might make the most sense, and it may be a reasonable amount, but also I think we need to have a real deep dive of whether or not this makes sense for us to continue to be the tenant or the leasing it with DNR, or if there is some other direction we could go. Because, I mean, if the pilings are $515,000, yes, we may know how much an adjacent marina spent, but the scope of their project was so much larger that when we talk about the cost to just get started, this small breakwater could cost significantly more per foot than a whole marina. And I'm really concerned about it, and I don't want us to go I get nervous that it's going to turn out like our 12th and Commercial project roundabout that kind of got ahead of us, and we need to be very careful about having information to council so that we can help determine if we need to swallow a tough pill sooner than later.
Miller?
Mr. Young?
No, I just wanted to echo my agreement with Ms. Cleland McGrath, just with the, thought that being able to delve deeper and to take a hard look at where we are, what we want to do, and how we want to get there, so it's no real surprises. I just really wanted to echo my total support for that idea. Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
I also agree with that, and I have a question about one other slide. It's the table that shows, I think it's the slide before this one. Yes. I'm not sure I entirely understand that. So our new budget is about $10 million more, and all those numbers in the middle added or subtracted from that get us there? Is that right?
Yeah, so these are the major items that were changed to get us from the 114 to the 124.3. The outfall, the piling, removal, breakwater.
Okay, so we took so that's the negative, that got subtracted, and then the rest were added. Okay, so 0.1 million for the downtown streetscape? Didn't we subtract that, or?
Yeah, it was 80,000. Yeah.
Okay.
$80,000 increase.
Gotcha. Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
You can tell them it's my fault on the outfall, Mr. Hoagland, because I always try to be aspirational that we're going to finish it and not have to continue paying for it in 2025. But yes, it's different from the budget message significantly. All right, so I'm not hearing anything from council.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
I'm guessing you're looking for, or hoping for, an approval tonight on this?
Well, if it pleases council, we would be ready to do that in the finance department.
I mean, I haven't heard any significant additional questions to be asked or any significant discussion, other than I agree with Ms. Cleland McGrath that we need to have some more discussions around that breakwater and the leases. So I move to approve Ordinance 4090 to adopt the 2025 operating budget of $124,342,158.
Second?
Okay, I've got a motion by Mr. Fantini and a second by Mr. McDougall to adopt Ordinance 4090, 2025 operating budget. Any additional discussion? Franciac, vote please.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Ms. Hubick?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and then next up is 4088, and I think we've just, Mr. Hoagland has presented. Any other questions about that for Mr. Hoagland?
Yeah, so that's just, they go hand in hand. The CFP needs to be adopted in conjunction with the budget, so that would be the next step.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
I had a question. It might be more a follow-up for Ms. Moulton from her committee report. But as I was reading through and going through the capital facilities plan, I kind of felt the same way, like, wow, this is a lot of very aspirational items that we have on here. So I guess my question is this something that, I'm assuming it's something that can be amended, and was the committee hoping that we would wait kind of to have that bigger discussion before we approved this facilities plan, or?
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton, thank you.
Thanks for asking that question. I did want to talk about this a little bit in light of looking at these numbers here. As we can see, number 2029 is especially high, but again, that whole aspirational thing is something that I am seriously ready to address, but not tonight, to the extent of not passing the CFP. But I think we need to do some real work on this and be stricter in our parameters and a little less loosey-goosey with, oh yeah, let's just put it in there. So I think we can do that work here, hopefully in even the beginning of 2025.
Yeah, I think staff and I certainly heard from council about kind of more of a strategic plan where we can take a look at, less aspirational, more realistic, I think is what I heard. And that's a good thing when it comes to longer term planning.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
No, just in follow-up to the two of you and to Mr. Fantini's question, it did come up in our discussion tonight, just about you have to reach for it. That's one thing, and it has to be in there in order to be able to get certain resources. And so, we were just beginning a discussion of how do we be more concrete about what we're looking for that we believe we can attach, but yet at the same time leave room for the aspirational part. The city itself is, known to be innovative. We've got departments that are using dollars multiple times in a good way in order to save money, but we've got to have a way just to be a little bit more concise so that it's clear to the public, as well as what the goals are and the deliverables that we're looking for within the department. So, that's a further discussion, as the mayor and Ms. Moulton said, but we're looking forward to that part of it.
I think the good news is the staff is working on a number of plans, whether it's the stormwater or master plan, the transportation master plan, that will better inform the CFP, so we will be less loosey-goosey about, figuring out what we need to spend in the long term.
Yeah, Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
I know, I'll just go on the other side and say the fact that when it's not budget time, then we give staff a hard time when they bring stuff to us and we say, well, it's not in the CFP, so how are we supposed to know? So I think that there's it's a living document. It's not going to be perfect. What we need to do is have everyone as familiar with it as possible, and when things are no longer relevant, remove it. I think a couple years ago, we tried to do some kind of ranking system where if it was necessary versus a want versus a need versus a want, and that just got really muddy too. So I appreciate what it is currently. I think we can always continue to edit it, but that's kind of the nature of it, is that it has to be a little bit messy. But other than that, I'm okay with the current state of it. And so that being said, I move to approve Ordinance 4088 to adopt the 2024 to 2029 CFP amendment.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Cleveland McGrath and a second by Ms. Hubick to approve Ordinance 4088, 2024 to 2029 CFP amendment. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franczak, vote please.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And that ranking system was a thing that OpenGov allowed us to do, so we can finally put OpenGov to bed forever. Let's see, item 6C is next. This is an interlocal agreement with Skagit Conservation District, NPDES, Phase 2 Public Outreach and Education. This is a discussion item with possible action, and we got Mr. Rayum probably going to maybe introduce Mr. Estival.
Yep, I'm
We'll
just
see.
here, Andy Raymond, Public Works Director. I'm here to introduce Aaron Esterholt. He's your stormwater manager. This is his first time public speaking, so here we go.
Glad you warned them. Thank you, Mayor, Mr. Council members. I'm Aaron Esterholt, Stormwater Manager. Before you tonight is an interlocal agreement with Skagit County District in the amount of $19,822 per year. This is a 2-year contract. This partnership is a continuation of ones we've had in the past. We work with Mount Vernon, Burlington, Cedar-Woolley, and Skagit County. This helps us meet our Phase 1 municipal stormwater permit requirements. Activities include hosting educational workshops, watershed master volunteer program, volunteer water quality monitoring, social marketing, backyard conservation program, stormwater education materials. Without this, the city alone would not be able to produce the robust of an education outreach program without partnering regionally.
All right, that's not it. You got to stay up here, Mr. Esterholt, because council likes to have questions typically.
All right.
So now's your time to shine. Any questions for Mr. Esterholt?
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Fantini?
have to get at least one question in for you.
All
So we've done, this is a continuation, as you mentioned, as we've done before, and I'm assuming last time that we entered into this, we had a similar thing where we did some workshops, that type of thing.
Right.
I'm just curious, how many people, like, do we manage how many people, or do we follow how many people attend those workshops, or are they?
Yes, we do and don't. I'm going to answer that question in a weird way because we usually have it out at by the port, but we also host here in town. I don't know if you've seen the poop ferry. Have you seen that? With
Oh,
the
yeah.
dog poop and stuff.
I have
So
the
things
little
like-
thing.
Yes. So I don't have the numbers, but I can get those for you. But yeah, they do track those.
Okay. And has there been any feedback? Like, do we find that since this is a continuation, I appreciated
I don't
letting
know
us
if we
know
get
that.
feedback, but I can tell you a lot of the materials I use when we do source control. A lot of the posters and stuff we make, they make. Those are what we use for our program here in the city. So I know tomorrow we have a meeting in Skagit County. We're going to go over a lot of this. I will get all those numbers and stuff tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
Our annual report on that.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young?
No, what I wanted to pay was a compliment.
Okay.
Okay, and I wanted to say that, what I appreciated was being at that fair that you referenced, the festival. And I was amazed at the number of people surrounding the tables. And they were asking questions, and it was just such a beautiful thing to show how it was working because, again, it's an education process. And, how we all go about doing the things that we do affects everything and everyone else. And the team and you were just superb in walking me through it without making me look crazy because I did have some good questions. But, I really wanted to say thank you because the work I know you guys put in it and, particularly I think is important all year, but culminating to year-end new jobs, movement within. It's good to affirm, at least from my view, and I'm sure many of members of council, that of the hard work that we know is going in, and we know we're trying to help and protect what we have, and I know it's a lot of hard work going in it. So I just really want to say thank you and how much I appreciate the job that you and Andy and the others are doing, because you really do a good job and you try very hard. No one gets everything perfect. No one. And it's important to recognize that. But it's also important to give us the best that you got. And I believe that that's what's taking place. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, any other questions, comments, motions?
Oh, okay, Mayor.
Mr. Young?
Thank you for the lead up. I moved, wait, make sure I'm on the right one. I moved that City Council authorize the mayor to execute interlocal cooperative agreement 25-005-STM-001 between City of Anacortes and Skagit Conservation District.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young and a second by Mr. Fantini to authorize me to execute the interlocal cooperative agreement as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, vote please.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Fantini,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Osterholm. Nice job. Okay, final item on the agenda tonight is 6D. This is Resolution 3172, a resolution regarding proposed amendments to the Anacortes Urban Growth Area Boundary. This is a discussion item with possible action, and Mr. Coleman will be presenting. Mr. Coleman, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Mayor, Council. My name is John Coleman, I'm the Director of the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. So, as Council probably remembers, back in August, the City Council passed a resolution establishing the docket for the 2025 Comprehensive Plan. Included on that were 2 urban growth area expansion requests. One was a request from the city to add 9 city-owned parcels that are not currently within the city urban growth area, nor within city limits, obviously, into the urban growth area. These parcels are all adjacent to the city limits and adjacent to city-owned land, mostly the ACFL. And so that was one of the items that went to the Planning Commission for review this winter. And the other was a request from Signal Hill Family Limited Partnership. You probably remember the conversation on this. They had requested originally to include over 100 acres of their land just south of the Sharps Corner area on the west side of Highway 20 into the urban growth area. After the City Council discussed that, the City Council pared it down to 3 parcels owned by Signal Hill Family Limited Partnership, totaling 17.8 acres for the Planning Commission to review and make a recommendation as to whether or not those should be included in the urban growth area. I'm going to go backwards a little. Back in July, all urban growth area expansion requests were due to the county. The county has a process where urban growth area requests are due along with all docket requests for the 2025 period. And so we needed to have the application in July. So we submitted the application sort of as a placeholder. I mean, we knew we were gonna, we included both of these applications that I just discussed, not with any strong support. Except for the city-owned property. In that application, I made a strong support for that because it's fairly straightforward. Since none of those lands are for development, none of the city-owned lands would be for development. They would just be for park and city use. So they wouldn't be counted towards our population projection growth or usable land for accommodating housing or accommodating jobs growth. And I also put in the Signal Hill land, so the city had time to discuss it in depth and determine whether or not we needed to have that urban growth area expansion to accommodate residential growth. They had requested that it be in residential, I believe R4 was the request because it's adjacent to R4 land. So in the meantime, we completed our lands capacity analysis and brought that to the Planning Commission. I've presented to the City Council at one point also. We've continued based on City Council comments and Planning Commission comments. We did additional work on it, and the final one is included in your packet. In that land capacity analysis, we found that within our existing city limits and urban growth area, we have enough residential land to accommodate not only our projected population growth between now and 2045, but also we have according to the analysis, enough of the types of zoning necessary to accommodate all of the housing types that we need to accommodate in all of the area median income brackets to accommodate the 2045 population projection. Similarly, we found that we have enough land to accommodate the projected types of employment that we're going to have between now and 2045. So considering that our current city limits and urban growth area boundaries do have enough land to accommodate our projected population growth and housing growth and employment growth, staff did not see any reason to support an urban growth area expansion for more residential land. That is what we presented to the Planning Commission, and as you can see in the Planning Commission's findings or recommendation, they also recommended that the Signal Hill property not be included in our urban growth area. The Planning Commission did find that we should include the city-owned properties into the urban growth area. They are intended to be used for city use, mostly park. And so, like I mentioned before, it doesn't have any bearing on our population projections, so it doesn't change or alter in any way our ability to accommodate future growth of residential and employment land. So what this resolution today in front of you would do is give official support from the City Council for this urban growth area expansion that the county needs as part of that application that I submitted in July for the urban growth area change, so that they know that the city does fully support the application that's been submitted to them. Also, the way it's written is it's written to the resolution says to not include the Signal Hill property and directs staff to modify the application that we've submitted to Skagit County to remove that portion of that application and instead just support the urban growth area expansion for city-owned land.
I think that was it for you, Mr. Coleman. All right, council.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
Sorry. First, sorry that I didn't call you. Normally I like to call a little bit and ask some of these questions before, but with it being Thanksgiving week last week, I didn't have a chance to touch base. So if you don't have some of the answers, no problem. You can just let me know. One of the things that I'm kind of struggling with a little bit is the recommendations that we're making are based off the land capacity analysis. So I went through and I took a look at the methodology and adequate provisions and learned a lot, but also I was looking specifically at figure 11, which is on page, I think 15, and it has to do with potential ADU parcels in Anacortes. And I'm just wondering how much, because when I look at this and it shows, and I know that the yellow doesn't mean that that's everywhere that an ADU is going to go, but it's everywhere that we're saying an ADU could go. And in Ward 3, we have a lot of HOAs, a lot of HOAs. I think there's probably several throughout the city. And a lot of those HOAs have covenants. And some of those covenants say no ADUs or there's limitations. And I'm just wondering, in this land capacity analysis, how much of the housing that we're saying we can provide is based on ADUs?
So because there's a lot of metrics that we don't know how ADUs are going to be put in, and what the Department of Commerce recommended is of the properties that could potentially have ADUs, and no, we don't worry about CCNRs for this purpose, not saying that we're going to allow them in areas where there's CCNRs, but we're just looking at our zoning. Where there's capacity for the zoning, we did an inventory there. And then we only took 5%, or the assumption is that only 5% of all of those parcels, and as you pointed out, there is a lot of parcels on which ADUs could be potential. Based on Commerce guidance, we just said roughly 5% of those might, over the next 21 years, 22 years, actually see an ADU be built on it. Not saying where they're going to be built, just overall 5% of those total.
Okay. And then as far as the land capacity analysis, we're saying that we have enough land to build everything that we would need to build. How close was it? I mean, I guess my question is, like, are we barely squeezing in there, or do we have, like...
It's in the land capacity analysis. My version here is so tiny on my phone.
I know, I don't...
It's close, but it's not like razor thin. It's not right at the limit or anything, so it's comfortable.
And then just in regards to first of all, I'm very in support of including the forest lands. That I think is an easy no-brainer for me. I do kind of struggle a little bit with the Signal Hill one, mainly because, again, so am I understanding it right that the county would look at that application and say, well, your land capacity analysis says that you don't need it, so we're not going to approve it? Is that the only metric that they use?
That's exactly accurate. Yeah, yeah. If the county will not, and that's based on Growth Management Act rules, you don't create an urban growth area that is way bigger than you can justify having it. That is the way the Growth Management Act, that's perpetuating sprawl and poor planning, instead of focusing growth on where it can be accommodated and where you expect it to be where you expect it. So they've already told us that they're not going to allow an urban growth area expansion unless our land capacity analysis says that we show a need for additional land. And even then, they might prefer that they lower our allocation of residential units and give it to another city that has more room in their existing urban growth area.
So regardless if we approved this, yay, that we want to do it or not, you're pretty confident that the county would say, sorry, we're not going to do it?
It would be an uphill battle for sure, yes. I'm very confident that the county would say, we're not going to, you can't justify that.
Okay, thank you.
And just to try to answer your other question, I don't think Mr. Coleman has it in front of him, but I think figure 12 on page 16, which is page 354 of the packet, this one, it shows the
Yes, you're exactly right. It
okay,
shows
just wanted to make sure that's to answer that question. What was the delta between those two? And I won't do that public math of 3586 minus 2942. That's the number.
Miller?
Mr. Young.
Thank you. I'm very interested in moving this forward. I do. But I think I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't just say it one more time, maybe just for me, but, my conscience wants me to say it. And that is, when we were looking at these numbers and projections, I still struggle with the idea of March Point, in that being part of the possible development area.
It's not.
I
Not-
know, but
not for
just
residential.
available land, just available land. I still struggle with that piece of it. Not that that's something you have control over, but I just thought, at least for me, I know I probably wouldn't buy a home there, but that's up to somebody, a willing buyer and a willing seller. So, but anyway, no, that's not important, but I just, in looking at where the possibilities are, I am, no.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. People say, okay, the March's Point is in the city urban growth area, so there might be a presumption that it could be developed for any use. So it's zoned heavy industrial, and so residential's strictly not allowed in that area.
that settles it for me too, you know, because again, you know, March Point is growing, hopefully, in a way, but just when I began to think about the need for housing, the need for, as more people began to come, you know, where would they go? For people like myself that's been here 14 years, you know, when I first got here, I was wondering why we didn't tell everybody about Fidalgo Island. I honestly could not grasp why you didn't want people to know about it as much as I understand now that, you know, it is a treasure that we have, and I'm probably no longer in that corner. I can confess that. Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Thank you. So, thank you for providing this. This is the final land capacity analysis, and it was produced on November 21st. So this is kind of our first time as council, and as planning committee hadn't seen it beforehand. So it was valuable information. I guess my question is that at the end of the analysis, they talk about various barriers, such as low-rise, mid-rise housing barrier, and it's a review and checklist. So how this barrier affects the housing production, why or why not, and actions needed to address the barrier. It also goes into some of the things like emergency housing and things like that. I guess my question for you is, how will this information be brought forward either with Planning Commission when it comes to our comprehensive plan? How are we going to integrate kind of this study moving forward so that it informs our comprehensive plan? Because I think there's some really valuable information in here.
Mm-hmm. So it's guided the population projection and you know, our determination of, do we need more land to accommodate different types of housing? Do we need to expand urban growth area? To which, you know, we find the answer is no. And it can be used, especially the adequate provisions part, be used to review our goals and policies of the housing and land use, which so that document is out there for that review. And you know, we just had a first blush at those, the first public hearings, and so this will continue to be a background document that could be used. Now those, you know, those are more like recommended items instead of like items that need to be done. But so, you know, some barriers were identified and some recommendations were made to possibly address those barriers.
Okay, yeah, and I guess I just want to make sure that some of this information that's deeper in here, such as low maximum building heights, that the 35-foot height limit, it says for a 3-story structure, if we increased it to 40 feet, would increase flexibility in our floor. Like, there's some really good information here that I hope is discussed at the Planning Commission level so that the public can hear about it. Minimum lot or high minimum lot sizes, and like there's some really kind of tweaks, and some of this stuff came in the housing action plan, so I'm probably more aware of it than the average person, but I just think that there's some really good those tables of incremental small changes and tweaks to our existing development regulations could really help do this kind of infill. I'm less worried about kind of do we have a land capacity analysis and making sure we have enough land. I'm aware of that. It's the actual application of how do we need to move from as many cottages, do we need to really do townhomes because it has less impact on neighborhoods. I think that there's some good information on those last 4 or 5 pages that I'm hoping makes it forward for discussion at Planning Commission and some of these other venues.
We'll make sure those are available as we go, particularly the housing action plan review, and these are very relevant.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
I just want to tag on to what Ms. Cleland McGrath said. I think this is a really helpful chart, and it does illuminate part of some things we've discussed in the Housing Action Plan and we'll discuss going forward. So I'm very much in favor. Again, something as small as, well, I shouldn't say small, but changing a 35-foot height to a 40-foot height, if that gets us more housing, I think people can live with that, just for example. So, I mean, this is a really great thing to see, and I look forward to delving into it in the future.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Hubick.
I would make a motion to adopt Resolution 3172 regarding proposed amendments to the Anacortes urban growth area boundary.
Second?
Motion by Ms. Hubick, second by Ms. Moulton, to adopt Resolution 3172. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, vote please.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Ms. Hubick?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, being no further business before the council, I'll adjourn tonight's meeting.